to QI, where the composition of our panel is intentionally international. From Denmark, Sandy Toksvig. From Germany, Henning Wehn. From Scotland, Clive Anderson. And from God knows where, Alan Davies. Now, tonight's show is all about inattention and ineptitude. Alan, what is tonight's show about?
Inattention and ineptitude.
That's 10 points off for starters, because actually tonight's show is all about inequality and injustice.
Oh, of course.
Yeah, and so we unjustly took 10 points away from you.
Yes.
Because this
I'm
is a
used
show
to it.
in which nothing will be fair from top to bottom. So let's get it over with and go straight to the scores. In first place, with minus 54, it's Sandy Toksvig. Congratulations. In second place, with +7, is Clive Anderson.
Objection, my lord.
In third place, with -60, is Henning Wehn.
Don't mention the war!
And lastly, obviously, with -1 gazillion, is Alan Davies. There we are.
So that's it, you've done the scores already?
The scores are already done, but we've still got questions to ask.
Yeah.
And don't forget your nobody knows joker.
Nobody knows.
There is a question tonight, or maybe two, or three, to which the correct answer is nobody knows. And if you wave your nobody knows joker, you get extra points. Or maybe you lose them. Or maybe you don't, because the scores have already been given. It's an unjust game tonight. And the first question is an easy one, so I'll give it randomly to my old friend Sandy. What can you tell me about this chap behind you?
Oh. Well, do you think that the words give it away, or is that going to be unfair? The fact that it says the Puritan.
Well...
That seems unfair.
It does seem unfair, doesn't it?
It's a horrible start to think.
Because what it is the 19th century idea of a Puritan, and in fact the 19th century idea of a Puritan, which we retain to this day, is completely inaccurate. The steeple hat and those sort of clothing, absolutely no evidence whatsoever.
They wore a
anything
beanie
like
hat normally, did they?
They wore ordinary clothes like anybody else,
Yes.
but if they were having their portraits taken, they usually wore their Sunday best, which tended to be black.
So he's not a Puritan at all?
He's a 19th century idea of a Puritan. You were right to say he was a Puritan, because it says on it, the Puritan.
I was merely reading.
And I was being unjust, and you've lost 10 points. But it doesn't matter, because you've already won.
Yeah.
So...
Do you know, I'm quite relaxed about the whole show.
Exactly. Now, what can you tell me about the Puritans in America?
They went over on the Mayflower. I keep expecting the thing to go off again.
Yeah.
They didn't go on the Mayflower.
No, the great American myth, if you like, is the Puritans arrived on the Mayflower. And they came to avoid religious persecution. In fact, they came in order to be able to persecute.
Yeah, but they hated the Quakers.
What they objected to was the religious freedom in England that meant that you could have all kinds of ranges of religion. Yes, and in 1660, they hanged a woman just for being a Quaker.
Yeah, Mary Dyer.
That's right,
Yeah.
the very one. Obviously, many people did come to America to avoid persecution in other lands, but the idea that Puritans came to avoid persecution is they came to persecute. They wanted to build a country in which there could be no dissent from Puritanism.
Puritans, they regarded luxury as sinful, didn't they?
Yes.
So, and some of them set off to America, and the others opened B&Bs in Britain.
Hey!
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, B&Bs, breakfast until 7. Don't call it B&B, just call it B. If you've got no intention of serving breakfast, don't call it B&B.
Do you know, I once did a trip. I sailed all the way around Britain, and we finally got to Northumbria, and on the coastline there was a house that had painted on the side. It said, bed and breakfast, hot and cold water. I thought, only in this country would you feel you must advertise that you have both.
Oh, yes.
No, it used to be hot and cold running water. Is there?
It's not just a bucket of it lying there. No, there's pipes and everything.
In this painting, did the native there on the left, did he bring that tree to hide behind? Because it looked...
He doesn't look happy.
And it is the wrong way round. Sure.
Yeah,
He
he
has
can
a-
see which way the wind is
I
blowing.
think he knows what's coming,
Yeah.
doesn't he?
So none of it's true, Stephen, that the Puritans weren't on the Mayflower. They always say they landed at Plymouth Rock, but in fact it was Provincetown. So none of it is actually true.
I'm afraid it's a myth. Every country likes to build up a sort of legend of its own foundation. Well,
Really ugly baby.
it is a rather ugly baby.
Tiny person standing behind that woman.
It's not any use, isn't it? Don't learn that expression. Really ugly baby. There's never an opportunity to use that in real life.
Little tiny... I'm really enjoying this painting.
Yeah.
They've come all the way over and brought one pickaxe and a hat between them.
There's no basis on which to build a country, is it?
The guy on
And
the
yet-
right brought a girl.
Yeah.
And yet 300 years later, it was the mightiest nation on earth.
Extraordinary. No thanks to him with a hat.
I don't think the man in the hat had much to do with it. Anyway, that was our first unfair question. Puritans didn't really dress like that. What key role did a Puritan pig play in the trial of George Spencer in 1641?
Is that the actual pig we're looking
No, that is not the actual pig, because that's a photograph of a modern pig posing as a 1641 pig.
A rather similar picture of myself at a spa.
You've got too fewer nipples.
Well, certainly the nipples were a surprise.
But that look of contentment,
Yes,
I'm sure,
exactly.
is absolutely. So one
It's a
happy pig.
That's a pig in clover.
A pig in
isn't it?
clover, absolutely.
George, when did you say, what year did you say?
1641.
Are we talking about witchcraft in some
We're still in New Haven, Connecticut, the centre of the Puritan...
Is this a bit like that monkey they hanged in Hartlepool?
Well,
Because they thought he was a Frenchman, didn't they?
Yeah.
that's right.
yeah.
The monkey in Hartlepool was hanged because they thought he might be a French spy. They knew French people spoke a different language and were small, and cartoonists had gone out of their way to make them look diminutive and nasty. So they see a little monkey. And
What's more-
they buy the propaganda.
When the monkey was in the dock, it was thoroughly evasive.
Yes, right, exactly.
Didn't give a straight answer to any question.
This, on the other hand, is a Puritan world,
Yeah.
and I would remind you of Leviticus 20:15.
Not eating pork, presumably.
No, if a man lie with a beast, he shall surely be put to death, and he shall slay the beast.
He laid with a pig. He
George
just,
had his end away with a piece of pork.
he just fancied a bit of crackling, that's all.
It's even unfairer than that. It so happened that George was a rather ugly fellow who was bald and had one eye. And one day, a sow farrowed, I think is the right word, a litter of piglets, one of whom was strikingly similar to George and had one eye. And so George was immediately put in front of the Puritan court and accused of having lain with the pig.
He didn't have the chance to get a super injunction before. Disgraceful.
He denied it strenuously, as you might. And typically, Puritans, they then said that there shall be mercy shown should you be open and honest. So he thought, well, that means if I say yes, they'll let me off. So he said, well, yes, all right, I laid with the pig. And they said that the mercy will be shown by the Lord, but not by us. But in order for there to be a capital offence, there had to be 2 witnesses to it. So they included the pig. So they brought the pig into the trial to speak against itself, or squeak against itself, and both George and the pig were executed.
Both got the chop.
Both got the job.
Did the pig then sort of shyly look at George in a kind of... I remember that night way, or...
I think the whole thing was just... It was
Pig
part
came in
of
and said, that bastard. He never rang. He just used me.
Some 50 years later, there was the very famous sort of mass hysteria in Salem,
Salem, the Salem witch
Massachusetts,
trials,
the witch trials. But this was before even them. There were the bestiality obsessions as well.
Who's the other? Sorry, who's the other witness though?
George.
The pig. The
George
pig.
said yes.
Oh, so his confession was...
His
yes.
tricked confession was
Yes,
counted
indeed.
as a
Yeah.
confession.
If you'd have been there, he'd have got off. Clark.
Yes, of
Oh,
course.
I'd like to think so, but these days you convict people just on the confession. You don't even need the pig.
No, you don't. There was a man caught in an intimate situation with a donkey in 1710 in France. He was caught in the act with a female donkey, and character witnesses appeared. This was so sweet. On behalf of the donkey. Saying that this was an honest donkey and a modest donkey and a decent donkey. So the man was executed and the donkey got off scot-free.
The law is an ass.
Yes, indeed.
It seems very unfair to execute the pig.
Totally.
If the sin is lying with a beast...
No, Leviticus, I remind you, 20:15. If a man lie with a beast, he shall surely be put to death, and ye shall slay the beast.
Ah.
Does anyone know, incidentally, why did the New Haven Puritans abolish trial by jury?
Well, the Bible has stuff about judge not that ye be not judged, which I think is in the Gospels. So does that go on to say, oh, and don't be on a jury either?
No, but oddly enough, you're in the right area.
Yeah.
It's simply that juries are not mentioned in the Bible.
Yes.
And so they
you
thought
can't have
they had no place in life because they didn't have them in biblical times.
Well, what about a propelling pencil? They wouldn't have that either.
Well, right, there are indeed communities of Amishes and various other brethren who don't use things.
It's a sin to use a propelling pencil.
Well, it's very hard, I agree. It's a very peculiar world, the world of the Puritan.
America's full of those strange rules. So did you know that it's still the law in Alabama that it is illegal to wear a fake moustache in church that causes laughter?
They got Groucho
fine.
Marx on that, didn't they?
Design applies, apparently. But
It's okay if it's serious.
If people take it seriously, but it causes laughter in the church, you're out.
I think under Thatcher, or maybe just after, under John Major, there was a Lord Chancellor called Lord Mackay of Clashfern. Do you remember him?
Fine
Lord
man.
Mackay. And he was a member of the order known as the Wee Frees,
Yes.
who were a very extreme sect of Presbyterians. And he was actually expelled from the Wee Frees for attending the wedding of a friend who was a Catholic.
No, it was a funeral. It was a
Oh, it
funeral,
was a funeral,
it was a funeral
was
of a judge who was a Catholic.
It was a funeral of a judge.
That's consorting with the Antichrist, unfortunately.
Just going to the funeral of a friend.
And he was an elder of the Kirk and had spent his
Yeah.
whole life in the church, and he had to go.
I was expelled just for going to the funeral of a friend. There was a good story about him. I'm not saying any Scottish mean jokes, but he was apparently quite a frugal man. And apparently he held a tea party for various lawyers and procurators fiscal, whatever they call themselves, in Scotland. And there was a little tea, and there was tea, and there was a tiny pot of honey and some toast. And someone had the toast and this little pot of honey, and one of the lawyers looked at it and said, "I see your lordship keeps a bee." Very good line.
He's a fine man, though.
And a good lawyer, no doubt.
Yes,
He
I
wouldn't have
think
risen to his eminence if he had.
Yes.
We have odd flashes of Puritanism, don't we? Because I was listening to Radio 5 the other day and they had an actress on, not Angelina Jolie, but the one who's Lara Croft in the latest Tomb Raider film.
Oh, right, yes.
Cut a long story short, they airbrushed her nipples out of the poster.
Oh.
Her nipples were showing through her costume, just
Right.
two little...
Yeah.
But this was radio.
Not just for the radio. And she had complained about it and said, "Why have you airbrushed my nipples? That's ridiculous. Why don't you just leave them?" And they said, "Oh." And the presenter said, "Well, perhaps they thought they weren't suitable for children."
Nipples not being suitable for children.
She said, "Are you being serious?"
They are expressly designed.
It's for the purpose of the continuation of our race.
I did a sitcom for Channel 4 with the lovely Mike McShane, and he played a sex expert, and we decided that his apartment would have lots of sort of sex things in it, and he would have a coat rack made entirely of penises. And this went to the Channel 4 lawyers, and they said, "You can have the penises as long as they're not erect." And I said, "Well, how will it work as a coat rack?" And not my specialist area, but nevertheless,
You have to excite your peg before you can hang your coat on.
Right, royal unfairness now. Who got the blame when the Prince of Wales misbehaved?
Well, seeing we're in Britain, usually the Germans.
Yeah. Well, they are German. So.
Well, they are.
Is it this prince? Is this?
It's not actually this.
is it another Charles?
Well, no, it's not actually. All princes of the blood.
Edward VIII was always in trouble as prince. Queen Victoria, so if I get it right.
And indeed earlier ones were often in trouble.
He was...
What I'm really talking about here, I suppose, is the business of corporal punishment.
Okay.
Until very, very, very recently in human history has it become unfashionable and indeed considered wrong to strike a child for a misdeed.
Mm-hmm.
It's now illegal to do so.
Is it?
I believe so. But it
Just
used
on
to
the
be...
way here, a small urchin annoyed me.
It used to be considered not only empirically but in every other sense a good thing.
How is he
to
holding
do.
that child up? He's got his thumb wedged in his
He's giving yes.
buttocks. That's the only way of holding him up. It's like a bowling ball.
I don't know whether that's Dickensian Do the Boys Fall from Nicholas Nickleby or something
Something like
similar. But generally speaking, almost everybody was agreed that it was good for children to be beaten. There was the Bible. He who spareth the rod hateth his son. Withhold not correction from your child. Beat him with the rod, and thou shalt deliver his soul from hell. Apparently. Children were always beaten. Really, we are the first generation. I mean, I'm not. I was beaten a huge amount when I was a child.
Were you?
At prep school, God, yes. From the age of 7 till 13, at least twice a week. I was a bad boy, and I was always being thrashed.
What for?
Oh, well, stealing, lying, cheating, being cheeky, being a nuisance, evading games. I
Bit of a
all the-
smart-ass, weren't
Yeah,
you?
being a
That sort of
smart-ass.
thing, yeah. Too clever for your
being
own good,
annoying.
that sort of thing.
being-
Always telling everybody what was
all
going on.
the things that annoy people
Well,
about...
it certainly beat that out of you, didn't it?
Yeah, they did. Exactly. And I was beaten a great deal, and did me no harm at all. But it was common practice. But it was outlawed in state schools when? When was it actually made a law that you were not allowed to strike a
Probably later than you
child?
think.
I'd guess under New Labour, I would guess.
No.
70s, in the 70s?
It was 1986.
1986.
1986 when it was made illegal in state schools to beat children. And it was a very close
Under
vote.
Margaret Thatcher.
231 to 230.
In
It
state
was
schools?
by one. And it was only... Do you know whom the state school children have to thank for the fact that they were not beaten from that day forward? It's rather odd.
Michael Howard or something.
No, it's even weirder.
Anne Widdecombe.
No, it's just too weird to be believed.
Ian Payne.
Fergie, dear Duchess of York Fergie.
The manager of Manchester United?
No, Duchess of York Fergie, as
Like
I
peas?
said.
What do you-
I will repeat, Duchess of York Fergie, until you understand which Fergie I
finished
mean.
my Fergie material. A tractor?
A massive Fergie, yes, you could say. That
Why?
Fergie. Well, because it so happened that the vote was on that day that she was marrying Prince Andrew.
Yeah.
And
He loves
That
to
is
marry
illegal.
Prince Andrew.
I think marrowing a prince is illegal.
This is a
Thank you
practice.
for that. What a great expression.
And-
There's some time for some marrowing.
and the,
I'm going to Google that one.
And
again.
apparently the traffic held up enough Tory MPs who were likely to have voted to keep beating for the anti-beating measure to go through.
Was this a whipped vote or not?
Hey, I don't
Oh,
think
I
it was.
thought
It
you
was a
meant
free
she'd
vote.
campaigned for it.
No, it
was
just so happened the vote was happened.
entirely inadvertent. She
It
did
was
something
totally
useful.
inadvertent. By mistake. By mistake, she helped. And when was it, or is it indeed illegal in private schools? In a private school, can you
Oh, you have
beat
to
a
pay
child?
extra, though, don't you?
I think it isn't now, but it's,
It
only-
isn't.
it's very
Must the
recent.
Human
isn't it?
Rights Act must.
Yes, in 1999, basically, that's when that stopped being legal. But until then, children were beaten. And they were beaten for making mistakes, they were beaten for all kinds of different reasons. But there was this idea also that you learned better, that things literally could be beaten into you, knowledge could be beaten into you. So what happened when you came to a prince? You can't have a commoner, even their tutor, beating a prince because he's made a mistake in his algebra.
So you beat his teddy, did you? Was that
Well, you appointed someone, a child, a friend of the prince, who, when the prince made a mistake, you whipped him. And that phrase, which is in common currency, is whipping boy.
Why
That's
would you
what a
want to
whip-
Well, and they
be...
become a peer then later on, don't they?
Yes, that's the point. It was actually a much sought-after post.
Yeah.
Fathers would want their sons to be the whipping boy. They would get close to the royal family. Charles I, for example, had a whipping boy when he was a prince, and he raised him to the Earl of Dysart, a title that still exists, and they became quite powerful people. So the idea was, of course, is that they would be friends, that the prince would like his whipping boy, so that he would try hard, but obviously sometimes they might think, I don't bloody care, he gets whipped. It's a most peculiar idea, but that is where the phrase whipping boy comes from.
And is there an official title as well? Because there are those titles like Silver Stick in Waiting. This could be
Or
Crimson Bottom.
Gentleman of the
Coming inevitably.
Yes, Gentleman of the Stool was an existing one, as you know. It was the one who had to wipe the king's bottom under Henry VIII.
Can't they do anything themselves?
They seem not to be able to do anything themselves. There's a part of...
I assume you'd have a long stick.
Yes, I assume.
A long stick with a rag on the end, do it from a distance.
There's a part of Germany called...
Sorry, for all the mime.
Yes, yeah.
I've always wanted to be a mime.
Yeah.
It's the only opportunity I get.
It's a lot more fun than just walking into the wind. Or I suppose you might be, I don't know. But,
You may think British schoolmasters are amongst the most sadistic, but it's to Germany we turn for really good examples of how to treat children. Swabia, in west southern Germany, there was a headmaster there who logged all his punishments in a book. And over his career as headmaster at this school, he logged 911,500 canings, 121,000 floggings, as well as numerous other punishments during a 51-year career. That's nearly 400 chastisements a week. Some of the work must have been delegated, he would be exhausted. Other punishments he logs include 700 boys made to stand with peas in their shoes, not too bad, and 6,000 made to kneel on the sharp edge of a stick. This was not a nice man,
it's not about the education.
It really isn't there.
There's something more going on.
Yeah, and Eton College had a famous headmaster called Dr. Keats. There's a Keats Lane in Eton, who was known as Flogger Keats. He once flogged the entire Eton cricket team for losing to Winchester, but including the scorer. So that was the whipping boy, and there's a kind of religious equivalent, isn't there? So if you take this poor boy who takes the sins of the prince, what was there in the Jewish faith that was the equivalent?
Well, you've got the lamb or the goat, haven't you?
The goat, famously known as the
Sacrificial...
scapegoat.
The scapegoat,
Yeah.
exactly.
Oh, I was expecting the thing
No,
to go off
that's
it, yeah.
exactly what they were. A scapegoat. There's the famous Holman Hunt painting of the scapegoat. And this was during the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur. The goat would be sent out, as it were, to carry the sins of the people, for the people. It bore the sins of the people. And then, of course, Christianity is just a refinement of that, where the Christ bore the sins of the people. And it happens in a lot of religions. That you offload your own wickedness onto something else. But yeah, so it is from whipping boys to scapegoats, and they exist in the language still. This idea of offloading one's own guilt. In the Isle of Man, they had corporal punishment until 1976. And what type of wood did they administer it with?
Well, I know I'm going to get a buzz on this because it's normally called birching, but presumably it wasn't a birch.
It
doesn't matter because the
Injustice is anyway.
So did it depend on how bad you'd been? So if you were really bad, it was holly, and they left the leaves on. But if you weren't so bad, it would be like sort of willow
Balsam
fronds,
wood.
or balsam wood for you. But
Hazel.
Hazel.
Yeah, the hazel. In Britain, birching, as it was known, was banned in 1948, but they didn't stop it until the 1970s in the Isle of Man, even though they tried to keep it by saying, all right, well, OK, what about if we let them keep their trousers on?
In America, there is still the tradition in some parts of birthday spanking. So,
Really?
yeah, where you go to school and then because it's your special day, and then there's a special treatment, the teacher takes the pedal out and then you get a few. And some people say, oh, we have to ban it, it's cruel. And then others say, no, we can't, it's a tradition.
Yes.
So and they have to carry on trashing the kids, I guess.
Weird.
It's a bit like family Christmas. No one likes it still because it's a tradition. Everyone has to go through it.
we get the idea of bringing a tree in to the...
That's your idea?
That's a German idea, wasn't it?
Yeah, I don't know. Did we invent Christmas?
Well, a lot of elements of it. Obviously.
Now, I say, come on. Either we invented it or we didn't.
Yeah. It's like that terrible joke, which I'm sure you must have been told, about the couple who adopt a German baby. you know it, yes, you must know it.
Is there only one joke that involves a German baby?
It doesn't speak.
It doesn't speak
Another
at
one
all.
where he doesn't speak.
He never speaks.
Yeah.
They have
Until he's about five.
Five.
Want me
And
to say
they
the
take him to be
punchline?
tested.
Because they think, is he stupid? Is he deaf and dumb?
Everything functioning normally,
Yeah.
fine.
Yeah.
And then one day...
One day.
Go on, Alan.
One day.
They give him...
Yeah, then he goes...
He has some
"Matze,
apple strudel.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And he says...
Matze, this Apfelstrudel is a bit tepid.
And they say, Wolfgang, you've never spoken before. After all these years, now you finally speak. Why haven't you spoken before? And he says...
Up until now, everything had been satisfactory.
It's a great joke. Very
Do you know,
pleasing.
this is,
like a relay joke.
this is the most fun a Danish person has had with a German since 1940.
Don't mention the war!
Oh, yeah. Well, there you are. Yes,
It's funny,
Manx.
the war. I mean, I have to chip in now. I mean, the war. The war is always World War II.
Yeah.
It's never any of the more current ones.
No, that's true.
They go with the war, and everyone in Britain takes personal credit for Britain winning it. Even people that weren't born at the time of World War II, they still take personal credit for Britain winning it. I've personally been a lot more annoyed by the Brits that are now in their 70s and they bang on about how they helped win the war. I mean, let's quickly do the maths. If you're in your 70s now, how old were you at the end of World War II?
That's true.
Maybe 10 years old? Yeah. How did you help win the war? When you were just 10 years old, you did not help
By not
win the war.
eating bananas.
Yeah. You were nothing but a drain on British resources.
You've got to admire his guts, haven't you?
Effectively, every 70-year-old Brit effectively fought on the side of Nazi Germany. Lost the war every little bit as much as we did.
Yes, well, moving on. Manx birches were actually made from hazel wands. Now, for a bit more international injustice, name a French book that can never be translated into German. This book was written with the express orders of its author that it was never to be translated into German.
And let's be honest, if that book originally was from France, there will be a very, very small market in Germany for that only. They might translate it all they want, they will just not find anyone who buys it.
Somebody who hates the Germans.
He particularly hated Prussians. That might date him better. Why would a Frenchman hate Prussians rather than...
Because the Franco-Prussian War.
The Franco-Prussian War.
Another war, I'm afraid, we don't want to
Another
mention,
war
but,
which...
But at least it's a different one.
Yeah, at least it's a different one. And we weren't involved.
we weren't in it, but we would have won it had we been involved.
Had we been.
Had we been born, had we been old enough.
Yes.
1870.
1870s is exactly the year of the Franco-Prussian War. Very good. And the Commune and everything, absolutely.
Yes.
Very good. He was a scientist, a great scientist.
Pasteur.
Louis Pasteur is the right answer, who is responsible, of course, well, he actually didn't invent pasteurization, but it's named after him.
Why did you hate the German?
I think it was the occupation and the attack into French territory. He was very patriotic.
Just narrow-mindedness.
And narrow-minded. But after the war, the Germans discovered a new form of yeast that allowed them to store beer extremely well. And the German for to store is...
Lagern.
Lagen, and so they called the beer lager, beer, and it became hugely successful. And this annoyed the hell out of Pasteur, that the Germans that he so hated had basically started to conquer the world of beer. So he'd set about studying...
He needed to move on.
I know, well, he set about studying how brewing worked, the science of the yeasts and the whole business of making beer. And he came up with some really, really, really good yeasts that made even better beer. And he took them around the world. He took them to America, he took them to Belgium, he took them to the Whitbread Company, he took them to the Carlsberg Company in Denmark, but he refused to take them to Germany. And he wrote a book all about it, instructing that it must never be translated into German. The Germans must never get their hands on the secrets for this new, better beer.
And of course, the German beer industry collapsed.
Unfortunately, it didn't work that well. It turned out nicely for the Carlsberg people.
There is an irony about the whole Pasteur thing, because when France wanted to get rid of its bouillon during the Second World War, in case the Germans got hold of it, it was
It's bouillon,
taken...
not its bouillon.
Bouillon.
Yes.
It's gold.
It's not its chicken stock.
No, not its chicken stock. Yeah. That went as well. Yeah. It all went to Canada on a single ocean liner. It was called the SS Pasteur.
Oh, really? Cool.
So he kind of got his own back, didn't he?
He did.
Yeah.
Back home to Britain now. From 1875 to 1956, what was the next best thing to a first-class train ticket?
Second-class train ticket.
That's the problem. You weren't to know, being a cursed foreigner and all.
We went to first to
There
third,
was
and
no
they
second
abolished the
class.
second
There was first and third.
But there were ladies-only carriages.
There were ladies-only carriages.
That
that's
would be
true.
quite nice.
Yes. And there were no smoking carriages, but mostly there were smoking
She's
ones.
got no idea where she's going.
How it came about was that Gladstone insisted there be a third-class service for the poorer people, and the train companies hated it. And so they ran these useless services that were third-class only, which are known as parliamentary trains that were no good to anybody,
But also-
just to apply the law. And then they had an even smarter idea, and they said, oh, we'll upgrade the third class to second class, but call it third class,
Yeah, clever.
and get rid of the second class. So we're obeying the law by having a third class, but it'll cost what second class used to cost. It's a very bizarre British
It
solution.
had an influence, I found this out when I was making a documentary, it had an influence on the way suburban housing developed in
Very
London,
much so.
because the train companies wouldn't sell third-class tickets in the outer suburbs because they didn't want the trains filling up with poor people. They didn't pay as much money as the first-class people, so they wouldn't sell the tickets. And that's why London's developed, and that's why there are bigger houses on the outside and smaller houses on the inside.
I thought it was because of the smoke.
Well, the big selling point for the trains was you could move out of London and get
Yes,
in a nice green
Metroland
field and
and
get
so
away
forth.
from the dirt.
Yeah.
So people wanted to do that, but all the development was along the line of the railways, and you didn't bother building cheap housing further out because no one could get into London because the trains wouldn't let you on.
Yes,
So
and
that's
they
how-
had clever ways. How do you think they used chimney sweeps?
What, on the railway?
Yes.
Strapped to the front of the train, keeping the rails clean.
No, it was a very naughty trick.
They
It
would
was-
sit in a third-class compartment.
Yeah, what the train companies hated were the genteel people who were kind of, clerks who didn't have much money but had to be well dressed. And so what they would do is they would put chimney sweeps in and put soot all over them. So the third-class carriages were so dirty that these poor people thought, oh, God, I've got to play the first-class fare.
Don't say this out loud, because I'm sure Ryanair will have an idea along these lines.
Brilliant!
Yes.
Brilliant! We'll do the same thing.
Or EasyJet, since you're in
Yeah,
EasyJet's
yes,
colours.
right. But I'm sure it didn't happen all over, but these were some of the tricks they resorted to, apparently.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which one's Dick Van Dyke?
They're really
Get him to
happy.
say
aren't they?
something.
Do you look happy?
do look terribly happy.
Lucky sweeps. Now for some sporting iniquity. What did cricketer Thomas White invent in 1771?
The Yorker.
The Yorker?
Yeah.
To hear a German say the Yorker gives
I don't know what it means.
It's a fully pitched up ball, but it's well good. Great to hear a
What's
German say...
googly then?
Yeah.
Googly is
And again,
a googly is a leg spinner's off spin. It's disguised. It's
Comes
very
out the back of your
and
complicated.
how does the Duckworth Lewis method work?
Oh, nobody knows that. That's far too complicated. No, he didn't invent any particular type of bowling or of batting, but he looked at the laws of cricket and he noted that there was a rather glaring omission, and he thought he thought splendid.
Oh, the big bat. Did he have
Yes,
the big
he
bat?
came with a bat that was wider than the wicket. This enormous bat. It was Chertsey versus Hambledon, which is the equivalent of Surrey versus Hampshire. So after 1774, they incorporated a law that said a bat must be no wider than 4.5 inches.
Do you know there were special golf rules for the Second World War?
Oh.
In Kent, because the Battle of Britain was happening, and
Yeah.
I can't remember exactly what it is, but there's...
I'm sorry, Hemming, the war's come up again.
And the bunker. And the bunker.
The rule was, if a player's stroke is interrupted by the simultaneous explosion of a bomb or by machine gun fire,
Yeah.
they may take the stroke again. But there's a penalty of 1 stroke.
Oh, that's so...
They may take it again if they're still there to take it.
I did a play with Paul Eddington, and he had a much treasured thing from a hotel room in Bristol during the war, which was just a card with a little bit of cord, and it said, "Please hang outside your room if you wish to be awoken during an air raid." Splendidly phlegmatic.
Do you know about that? There was a game, I think it was on St Helena, and they were playing on a pitch which was by a cliff edge, and a gentleman ran back to catch the ball and did catch it and then fell, unfortunately, and it was put down as caught brackets dead.
That's got to be a 6, because it's,
Yeah, but
it's over the boundary, isn't it?
There was a game in Norfolk played, and this is towards late summer. It's very people in playing village cricket will be very familiar with the sight of late swooping swallows. And a batsman played a shot, and a fielder leapt to his right and caught a swallow. Fantastic. But this fellow Thomas White, I suppose you could call him a cheat, but he was within the laws of the game as they were at the time. And there were others. There's an American footballer called Lester Hayes. Does that ring any bells with you? Of the Oakland Raiders, who had such success as a catcher in the late 70s that he was the Defensive Player of the Year. But the reason was that he covered his hands and gloves with an adhesive called Stickum. And he actually admitted, he said, without Stickum, I couldn't catch a cold in Antarctica.
But they're so clearly cheating. They must have spotted
Well,
that.
there was no rule against
There was no rule.
it. They had to introduce one, which there now is.
There's a very good P.G. Woodhouse story about cheating at boxing. There was a chap called, I think he was American, he was called McCoy, and his opponent was stone deaf. And the opponent said, I won't hear when the bell goes, will you tell me? And the man said, oh, yes, absolutely. And so they were boxing away, and he went, the bell's gone. And the guy went, oh, OK, like that, and he's punched him.
Well, that's taking advantage as well as cheating.
Yeah. And in 1951, the St. Louis Browns baseball team brought a 3'7" tall player called Eddie Geidel out to bat and crouched over at the plate. His strike zone, which, as you know, the pitcher has to hit, was 1.5 inches high. The poor pitcher couldn't get anywhere near. So 4 balls, and he walked to first base where he was immediately subbed, which was kind of like cheating, but it isn't.
Oh, no, that's not cheating, is it? Because you can scarcely have a rule that says...
Quite, says you can't have people with restricted growth. It's all very tricky. There was a jockey at Belmont in New York who, in 1923, died of a heart attack when on a horse and won. The horse won.
Oh, right.
And, of course, the bookies didn't want to pay out. But there was a rule that said the jockey had to be in the saddle. There was no rule that said he had to be alive.
Well, he was a brilliant jockey, then, if he clung on even though he was dead.
Exactly. Pretty amazing.
Keep going!
So the lucky punters were paid out. And so do that part of the show that's always unfair at the very best of times. It's general ignorance, so fingers on buzzers, if you would. Here is the Old Bailey. What is the Statue of Justice on top looking at?
Oh, God.
Yes.
Nothing.
What is that?
She's blindfolded.
Definitely not that.
No, she's not. No, it's an odd thing. But no, you can see there, no blindfold.
Sometimes that particular statue is not blindfolded, but sometimes it's shown as blindfolded.
You're
So
absolutely
people
right.
often at the Old Bailey would say, oh, if you, members of the jury, if you look up at it, there was a blindfold. I think the people go, well, he wasn't even telling the truth about that.
Yes, right. There are many statues of Lady Justice, some of which are blindfolded and some of which aren't. What can you legally do if you come across a Welshman in Chester after sunset?
These are laws that got abolished 300 years ago. It's legal to shoot a Welshman in Chester. It's just always repeated. You cannot shoot them.
Yes, it is one of those, just as you rightly say, one of these nonsensical things that people cling on to with great sort of pride, and which are nonsensical. Beautiful city, Chester, by the way, of course. And there was an edict under Henry V at the time of Owen Glendower that presumably he gave out, which is a wartime command. It's not a law. And in any case, any subsequent laws on manslaughter and, offensive weapons in public cancel out any such
How would you
edict.
know?
I know this when I did a documentary on going around America, one of the ideas we had before we started was, should I maybe break a law in each one of these stupid laws in each state? And the more we investigated them, the more we were found they were absolutely without foundation.
So you
Including the
just robbed
moustache
people
law, I'm sorry to
instead?
say.
Oh.
Yeah, because I thought, I'll do that. I'll go and wear a silly moustache and make someone laugh in a church. I said, no, that's just nonsense. I don't know how that got in there. That was made up by Mark Twain or somebody at some point. And one hates to disappoint. But a lot of these things are nonsense. The idea that you can shoot arrows down Petty Curie in Cambridge and things like this, as long as you're wearing Lincoln Green or something. The idea that an ancient law has to be repealed, even if it allows you to do murder, is nonsense, isn't it, in law? What's the principle called there?
What's the principle?
I think we're talking leges posteriores priores contrarius abrogant, aren't we?
Yeah, absolutely.
Had you forgotten that?
It was on the tip of my tongue. If putting things on the tip of your tongue weren't illegal. Some ancient statute.
It's a well-established legal principle that to the effect if a subsequent statute has the effect of contradicting an existing law, the existing law is repealed by implication. God, I'm glad I wasn't a lawyer.
Yeah. Well, recently they've tried to get rid of all these Latin things as well.
Oh, really?
It's confusing to people, so...
But isn't that the point?
Yes, that has been the argument of the lawyers. Yes, we quite like it if nobody knows what we're talking about.
Where where are the enemy in this picture?
That's a good question.
The guy on the right's definitely not sure.
He's puzzled. He said, why are you pointing over there?
I'm with the Reds.
I read law at university, and I was lucky enough to be taught by Lord Denning, and I helped compile the index to his last book. It was really dumb. I remember saying to him, I said, why is it so complicated to look up legal cases? And he looked at me over his glasses. He said, well, we don't want just anyone doing it.
Why did lepers start carrying bells?
Well,
Don't mention the war!
I forgot about that.
We haven't.
Yeah, I don't know. Probably it wasn't their choice to wear the bells. Probably it was more the other people telling them to wear bells so that they could escape.
As a warning, you mean? Yes. No, to keep people away. No, it was to attract people, to give them arms. To give
It was
them...
like an ice cream
Not to give them
bell.
arms in that sense. To give them money. I've lost my arms. Please give me some arms. No, to give them money.
Come here and give me money.
Yes. After the Black Death and the extraordinary sort of decimation of the population of Europe, sickness became obviously something people were much, much more worried about. And then the bells were used as a warning, but they were originally used to attract people. People were not that frightened of lepers, and for good reason, because leprosy is nothing like as infectious as people think it is. For a start, 90% of the human race is immune to it. Most of us are unlikely ever to catch it, even if we were to lick a leper.
Yes.
Now, there's a game show.
Why do I see Noel Edmonds?
The wish is father of the thought. It's quite hard to catch. It's nothing like what, the jokes of, bits falling off and so on. You can get nerve damage, which, if not attended to, can lead to sort of necrosis of the ends of the fingers, but the idea that bits fall off you and whatever is good for jokes, but it's not true.
Unpleasant jokes.
Well, never let the truth stand in the way of a mediocre joke.
Exactly, a mediocre joke. Exactly right. Now, which of you has the fewest hairs on your head? So
Well, may I just volunteer myself?
Yes.
I would have to, but so it's me, and I'm going to lose 10 points, and even more hair being annoyed about it.
It's one of the weird, strange things. There's a
That's
splendid
something.
man called Dr. George Kotsarellis of the Department of Dermatology, the University of Pennsylvania, and he has determined that actually you have the same number of hairs on the scalp as everyone else.
Yeah.
It's just that some of them are only visible under a microscope.
Right.
The
So that's roughly like not having them.
No. By the same token, humans may look less hairy, for example, than chimpanzees, but we've the same number of hair follicles, about 5 million, on our bodies as chimpanzees.
But the whole thing of hair is very annoying. I mean, if I'd never bought a pair of tweezers, I'd have a beard down to here. It's just you've got hair that grows in the places you don't want it, and then hair that doesn't grow where you do want it.
Hair that doesn't stop, like on your head. I mean, it keeps growing,
Yes.
so you get it cut every 3 months.
And then your eyebrows, if you're a man,
Yes.
know when to stop until you get a bit later in life, and then it
suddenly,
stops knowing when
whoa!
to stop. Yeah.
That's nice.
Then you can comb them up over
Yes.
your bald.
I've tried that. It's tried that.
Looks a little odd, but
Yes, yeah.
it's an option.
Well, you never know. And so we come to the scores. Well, now, these are very interesting, and it would be very unfair of me not to share them with you. So, that's all from Sandy, Henning, Clive, Alan and me. Because, as William Goldman said, life isn't fair. It's just fairer than death. That's all. Good night.
Katie Brand with choice cuts of comedy from this summer's Laughs in the Park, next on BBC Two, and on BBC Four now, from a tiny cube to a vast glacier. You'll be amazed by the secret life of ice.